بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه الطيبين الطاهرين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله نسأل الله تبارك وتعالى أن يرزقنا حسن النية. We ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to grant us all the sincere intentions. Today, inshallah, we will start reading together the saying of al-Qushayriyy, Abdul Rahim al-Qushayriyy. And we will mention what he mentioned in refuting those people that say that Allah is like the creation. Before we do that though, just as a summary, we'll mention the creed of such people. So the anthropomorphists, the mushabbiha, they say that Allah is like the creation. But let's look at their sources for saying this and their invalid interpretation. In summary, the verses of the Quran, they are of two types, either muhkam or mutashabih. The muhkam, it only has one meaning linguistically, and the mutashabih, according to the words in this verse, it could carry many different meanings, but only some of those meanings are suitable to be attributed to Allah. So the Wahhabiyah, they have a few rules that they mention, the anthropomorphists of today. They say it is obligatory upon us to take the mutashabih verses literally. Now, this is not all the mutashabih verses. They say it is obligatory upon us to take the mutashabih verses that mention the attributes of Allah literally. They say we have to take those literally, otherwise we would not be considered to be believing in the book. And what follows on from that is that they say if you do not take them literally and you interpret them, then this is kufr. And also they add to that only Allah knows the true meanings of these verses. They say nobody knows the true meanings of these verses, their reality, the verses in which the attributes of Allah are mentioned. They say only Allah knows their meaning. So just to keep you focused on where they are speaking, they're not speaking about the muhkam verses. They're not speaking about the verses that have one meaning. They're speaking about the mutashabih verses. So imagine you have muhkam and mutashabih. They're not talking about the muhkam. They're talking about the mutashabih verses, the ones that can carry more than one meaning in the language. And even the mutashabih verses, they're not speaking about all of them. They're talking about some of them. Which some is this? Those in which the attributes of Allah are mentioned. They say you have to take these literally. And they say that these very verses, only Allah knows their meaning in reality. Only Allah knows their true meaning. And you might say, well, where did they get that from? They say that they use a part of the verse we already mentioned from Soorah Al-Imran. وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ. So they say, only Allah knows their meaning. Literally, this verse, it would mean, and no one knows the interpretation of those verses except Allah. And they take the Quran literally, a lot of it. So they say, you've got to take it literally, and in reality, only Allah knows their meanings. And then they also say, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. Allah is nothing like the creation. So let's take an example. They say, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arsh istawa. They say this is a verse in which one of the attributes of Allah is mentioned. Istawa. So they say you've got to take the apparent meaning. So if they translate it, they'll say it means that Allah is above the Arsh. So this meets their principle of taking it literally. They've taken it literally. In the past, the Wahhabis, they used to say that Allah sits on the Arsh. And when they were attacked by that, attacked for that, they started to say, no, he's above. We don't say sit, we say above. But their teachers, Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim, al-Dhahabi, Ibn Kathir, these people who they go back to, they all said sit about Allah. So look, let's take this example and let's run it by their principles. Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arsh istawa. They would say, we've got to take it literally. So they would say, well, it means Allah, Ar-Rahman, is above the Arsh. And they would say, well, also, so this ticks one of their boxes. The second box, they would say, well, in reality, only Allah knows its meaning. Really, 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 only Allah knows its meaning, but we have to say above. And then they say, well, look, don't accuse us of being anthropomorphists, because laysa kamithlihi shay. Allah is not like the creation. So it's like this one pot that they put so many different things in. They put the Quran in there. They put, you might say, healthy things in there, and then they put different poisons in there. They've said that we have to take it literally, and if they take it literally, then they will attribute non-befitting attributes to Allah. But they say we take it literally, but nobody knows what it means except Allah. So how do you take it literally? Anyway, so they tick one box of their own principles by saying we should take it literally. Secondly, they say only Allah knows its meaning. And third, they say, but laysa kamithlihi shay. So they'll say, this is why you'll hear them saying, he has a hand about Allah, but not like our hand. Hand because they translated something literally. They took it literally, and they will say only Allah knows what it means, and laysa kamithlihi shay. So at the same time there, they have attributed a body part to Allah and said, well, in reality, only Allah knows what it means, and our literal take on it, that is through the eyeglass of laysa kamithlihi shay. He's not like the creation. Now, this verse, just before we mention the saying of al-Qushayriyy, this part of this verse, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ. The Wahhabiyya use it and say, well, only Allah knows its meaning. And this is actually something that they've kind of shot themselves in the foot here. And we'll see why. They've said only Allah knows its meaning. Someone would turn back to them, obviously, and say, well, how have you said then that you have to take the literal meaning if only Allah knows its meaning? Okay. So what does this verse mean? This verse, or part of this verse, is وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. You should have it written. It's written in your sheets. So, Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, they said, no, this is not the case. It's not the case that these verses in which the attributes of Allah are mentioned, only Allah knows about their meanings. They said, no, this is not the case. Rather, Ahlul Sunnah said that the word al-mutashabih has two meanings. Al-mutashabih, like muhkam al-mutashabih. They said al-mutashabih, this has two meanings. One of the meanings is the meanings of these types of verses in which the attributes of Allah are mentioned. And another meaning is, of these types of verses, are certain matters. Like the coming of a Dajjal. like the exact time at which the rain falls, like when the day of judgment, the exact second at which the day of judgment will occur. So Ahlul Sunnah, they said, al-mutashabih has two meanings. Either these verses in which the attributes of Allah are mentioned, that's known as a mutashabih matter. And mutashabih also means the matters that only Allah knows. This is what Ahlul Sunnah said. So they said the meaning of this verse that you mention is actually, well, let's add another layer now. So we mentioned the two meanings of mutashabih, and I mentioned them in the beginning so as to prepare us for what's coming. Let's look at another layer. This part of this verse, the scholars, they read it in different ways. They read it by stopping the recitation after the name of Allah, where it says, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. And this is called the recitation of stopping, qira'atul waqf, and this is permissible. And some scholars, they said, we can also read it the other way, which is not to stop at the name of Allah. وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. To continue. They said there are two ways of reciting it. So the scholars of Ahlul Sunnah said, well, in light of mutashabih having two meanings, either the attributes of Allah or the matters only Allah knows, and in light of this part of the verse having two ways of reciting it, either stopping or not, they said, if you stop on it, it gives one meaning. And if you decide, which is permissible, to not stop at the name of Allah and continue, it gives another meaning. Both meanings are correct. So they said to them, and all of this is to refute those that say, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهِ, that only Allah knows the meanings of those verses. All of this is being said to refute that. So Ahlul Sunnah said, let's look at the two meanings depending on whether you stop or not. The part of the ayah in completeness is وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. And it continues. So Ahlul Sunnah said, if you say وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ and you stop there, it means only Allah knows it. Now, what is the it here? Ahlul Sunnah said the it here is the mutashabih. But which one? Not the one that is that Allah knows, Allah only, Allah alone knows the meanings of these verses. No. Rather, actually, let me say that again. وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ. Only Allah knows it. Only Allah knows the mutashabih. Okay. Which mutashabih? Because Ahlul Sunnah said there are two. Either it is the verses that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala's attributes are mentioned in, or it's going to be the matters that only Allah knows. So which one did Ahlul Sunnah say? Ahlul Sunnah said, if you stop at the name of Allah and you say only Allah knows the mutashabih, then it only refers to the matters such as the day of judgment, when it will be, when ad-Dajjal will appear, and so on. And then they said, if you recite it the other way, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ, that no one knows the meaning except Allah and the knowledgeable scholars, then which mutashabih is being spoken about here? The mutashabih, which is the meanings of those verses. So you see, Ahlul Sunnah did not say there's a third type of mutashabih, which is that only Allah knows the meanings of those verses. The anthropomorphists, the mushabbihah, they made this one up. They misunderstood. So if we go back, what did the Wahhabiyya say? And other mushabbiha. They said, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. They said this means only Allah knows the mutashabih. And they said the mutashabih means every verse in which an attribute of Allah is mentioned. They said only Allah knows this. In actual fact, this is not called mutashabih. This is not called mutashabih. But they said every attribute, every verse, in which an attribute of Allah is mentioned, this is called a mutashabih verse. And then they said, well, look, Allah mentioned, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. Only Allah knows the mutashabih, and this is the mutashabih, so only Allah knows the meanings of these verses in which His attributes are mentioned. Ahl Sunnah said, no way, this is a lie. This is not true. This definition of mutashabih doesn't exist. Rather, the definition of mutashabih is two things. Either it means matters that only Allah knows, like the exact time of the Day of Judgment and the exact time of the coming of the Dajjal. That's called mutashabih. And the other mutashabih is a verse in which an attribute of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is mentioned, and the verse could have, hypothetically speaking, many meanings according to the language. Ahl Sunnah did not say it has a third meaning, mutashabih, which is that only Allah knows about His attributes and no one else knows about His attributes. So Ahl Sunnah said, and these two sayings, they become clear when you read the verse. Either you read it by stopping at the name of Allah. So you say, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. This up to here, it means only Allah knows the mutashabih. And there are only two mutashabih. Only one of them goes here. Which one? Only Allah knows the mutashabih, meaning the mutashabih like when the Day of Judgment is and when ad-Dajjal will appear. This only Allah knows. Nobody knows that. And if a person decides to read it, and this is valid. And the other way to read it is to read it in full. وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ, which would mean only Allah and the scholars, the well-rooted scholars, know the mutashabih. Which mutashabih is this? It is the meanings of the verses in which the attributes of Allah are mentioned. Nowhere did Ahlul Sunnah say there is a third type. There is a third type of mutashabih in the verses that only Allah knows. And this is important to understand because al-Qushayriyy is going to comment upon this. You'll see, and I'll point it out also. He's going to comment and say, how would someone claim that there is something in the Quran that nobody knows about? Not the Prophet doesn't even know about it. How is someone going to claim that? That there's something in the Quran that even the Prophet doesn't know about. The people would say to him, what are you calling us to? You don't even know what you're calling us to. You don't even understand it. And what's worse is that they would be claiming that these things that the Prophet didn't know or that no one can know, they're about Allah. So then how would we know the Creator? How would we worship the Creator? Okay? Is that clear? Yes? Yeah? Is there any question? No? I hope it's clear. Shall I go through it again?
It's clear. It's clear.
All right, okay. So, al-Qushayriyy said, and you'll see some of the things that he says, they are directly related to this. So, there's a part here that he mentioned in the beginning that right now I'm not going to mention. Right. So al-Qushayriyy said, we're going to start from I think it's the second or the third paragraph. I'll come back to this at the beginning. He said, how would it be acceptable for someone to say about the Book of Allah that there is something in it for which there is no way for a creation to know what it means, and that no one knows its meaning except Allah? How would it be acceptable for someone to say that? It's not acceptable. He said, is this not among the greatest discreditors of prophethood? That the Prophet ﷺ did not know the meaning of what was stated about the attributes of Allah Ta'ala, and that he called the creation to know what cannot be known? Did Allah not reveal in Soorah Ash-Shu, aayah 195, بِلِسَانٍ عَرَبِيٍّ مُبِينٍ, that the Quran was revealed in a clear Arabic tongue? Then according to their claim that only Allah knows the meanings of those verses, it would be necessary to say that Allah lied when he said that the Quran was revealed in a clear Arabic tongue, because its meaning would not be known. So how would it be clear? Or else, where is the clarity? And since this is in the language of the Arabs, how could someone claim that this is something that the Arabs do not know, even though it is Arabic? It was in Arabic. Hence, what kind of saying is this doctrine when it leads to contradicting Allah the Exalted? Al-Qushayriyy, what he clarified here is he doesn't want them to wriggle out of it, because he's trying to show us very clearly that they take the verses literally and then they say only Allah knows what they mean, and then they wrap the meanings of laysa kamithlihi shay around it, that Allah is not like the creation. They'll attribute him with a hand, and then they'll contradict themselves and say, but really only Allah knows what it means. We just take it literally, but also laysa kamithlihi shay. So he's calling them out on this. He's exposing them. He said, furthermore, the Prophet ﷺ used to call the people to the worship of Allah the Exalted. So had there been in what he conveyed to his ummah something which no one knows its meaning except Allah the Exalted, the people would have been able to say, first, clarify for us the one whom you are calling us, the one to whom you are calling us. Like to say, you're asking us to worship Allah, you're ordering us to worship Allah. Tell us about Allah first. According to the Wahhabiyya, the Prophet would not be able to explain the Quran or the verses of the Quran in which the attributes of Allah are mentioned. This is how one would know Allah, this is how one would know Allah, by his attributes. So it's as though they are saying, well, every verse that is in the Quran that contains the attributes of Allah Ta'ala, nobody knows it except Allah, not even the Prophet. So the people would have said, in this case, firstly, clarify to us, tell us, who is it that you're calling us to? And what is it that you are saying? What do these words mean, like yad and istawa and a'yun and so on? What do these words mean? Indeed, al-Qushayriyy said, believing in something which cannot be known is not possible. Like we say istawa, Ahlul Sunnah said istawa means that istawa means control. It doesn't mean sit. It doesn't mean above. And look, some of Ahlul Sunnah, remember that they said that we believe that it has a meaning, but it's not the literal meaning. And it's not like the creation. Some of them said that. So it might cross their mind, well, isn't that the same as what the Wahhabis said? Isn't that the same that they said, it's like saying Allah is not known? It's not the same, because negating something is also a type of knowledge. Like saying something that if you didn't know anything about a particular thing, except that it's not, for example, there's something inside the box. You have no idea what it is, except that it's not brown. It could be, it's not brown. That's considered a type of knowledge. So these scholars that said that Allah knows best what it means, but it's not like the creation, this is a type of knowledge. So they cannot be accused of calling towards being ignorant about Allah. Anyway, that will come inshallah too. Al-Qushayriyy said, and attributing to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he called to a Lord who is attributed with attributes that it is not possible to know, then this is a serious matter that no Muslim accepts. This is because ignorance of the attributes leads to ignorance of the attributed. In the same way that we say that in the saying of al-Ghazali, that لا تصح العبادة إلا بعد معرفة المعبود. Your worship is not valid unless you know the Creator. How would you know the Creator? Just by His name, or with His attributes. By knowing the meanings of His attributes. He is powerful, He is all-seeing, all-hearing, and so on. So what if someone came and said, no, you can't. Only Allah knows what His attributes means. All of the attributes. So what are you talking about? The goal for the one who has even a bit of intelligence is to clarify that that the saying of he who says his istawa is an attribute of Allah and it is impossible to know what is meant by it. So this is what they say. And the saying of the one who says that al-yad is an attribute of Allah and it's impossible for us to know what is meant by it, and that al-qadam is an attribute of Allah and that it's impossible for us to know what is meant by it. He said anyone with a bit of intelligence knows that they're saying like this, is a distortion of facts that leads to ascribing a manner of being to Allah. So istawa, they would attribute a modality, a manner of being to Allah, a how. They would say above. About al-yad, they would say it means hand. Al-qadam, they would say it means foot. He said anyone with a bit of, the word that he used was muskatun min al-aql, like even a bit of intellect. Anyone with a bit of intellect would know that they're saying it's a trick, it's a distortion of the facts, and it leads to ascribing a manner of being to Allah, likening Him to the creation, and it is a call to ignorance. And the truth has become clear for the one who has a sound mind. In the Arabic, he said, وَقَدْ وَضَحَ الْحَقُّ لِذِي عَيْنَيْنِ. He said, the one that has two eyes, the haqq is clear for him. لَقَدْ وَضَحَ الْحَقُّ لِذِي عَيْنَيْنِ. He said, I wish I knew about this one that denies ta'weel. Because remember, they say you've got to take the literal meaning. You can't do ta'weel. You can't give it a non-apparent meaning. They said, al-Wahhabiyya, they say, at-ta'weel, giving it a non-apparent meaning is ta'til. In other words, kufr. That's why they call Ahlul Sunnah, the Asha'ira and the Maturidiyya, kuffar. Al-Qushayriyy said, I wish I knew about this one who denies ta'weel. does he apply this denial to everything and every verse? So not just the verses in which Allah is mentioned. Does he do it with every verse? Or is he content with abandoning ta'weel in reference to the attributes of Allah Ta'ala only? I mean, does he do that for the whole Quran? That he takes the whole Quran literally? Or is it just when it comes to the attributes of Allah, he takes those literally, but the other parts of the Quran he doesn't take literally? He said, I wish I knew. He said, if he prevents ta'weel in all cases, then he has invalidated the religious law and the different branches of knowledge. Because there is hardly a verse or a hadith, except that it is in need of some level of interpretation, meaning it can't be taken literally. Many verses, they cannot be taken literally, whether they are to do with the attributes of Allah or otherwise. They need a bit of interpretation. They need a bit of, either it's a metaphor or something else, some type of figurative interpretation. He said, there is hardly a verse or a hadith except that it needs some level of ta'weel or verbal explanation. This is because there are things that certainly require ta'weel, a non-literal interpretation, for them to be understood properly. There is no difference among the sane people, about that, except for the atheist, whose intent is to invalidate the religious law. Because if everything was taken literally, then it would become contradictory, and there are many examples of that. Hence, the creed of denying ta'weel leads to invalidating what a person claims of being adhering to of the religion. So he might find that the verses that direct us towards the prayer implicitly, and the hadiths that explicitly direct us towards praying and to order people to pray and not to miss the prayer, he might find that if he takes all those literally, then it goes against what he actually believes about the state of the prayer being obligatory and other things that he does in his daily life, doing the acts of wudu and refraining from food. He would, if he looked into the texts and he took them literally, he would find that it becomes contradictory. He said, al-Qushayriyy continued, saying, if someone said, in general, ta'weel is valid, you can give non-literal interpretations, except for what is in reference to Allah and His attributes, because there is no ta'weel in that. Then if someone said that, then this claim of his implies that what pertains to other than Allah needs to be known, and what pertains to the Creator and His attributes needs to be kept away from. It needs to be something that's kept away from. Then this is something that no Muslim accepts. It's like saying, be jahil about Allah, but the other matters, fasting and prayer and inheritance and how much the child is to be breastfed and divorce, and that these matters, they need to be known. You need to have a good grasp on them. But about Allah, you need to be ignorant. Wal-'iyadhu billah. He said this is something that no Muslim accepts. The hidden reality of the issue is that those who prohibit ta'weel, those who don't allow us to give non-literal interpretations, in reality they believe in the actual likening of Allah to the creation, except that they use deception to misguide people, like what I mentioned to you. Recently there was a person, he saw a small clip that I did about Allah being without a place. And I was actually quite surprised. He did a refutation And in it he said that, oh, nobody says that Allah sits on the throne. Nobody says Allah sits on the throne. And this is in the recent past that they've started to say that he doesn't sit. When in actual fact, Ibn Taymiyyah and all of the people that they go back to, they explicitly mention that Allah sits. Some even said that he sits and leaves a gap of 4 fingers. All of them said this. And now because of the backlash that they got of attributing a body to Allah, an upper part and a lower part, and because of the backlash that they got for this ugly creed, they started to say istawa means above. So even he said in the little speech he gave, he said, nobody says Allah sits. But Ibn Kathir, for example, said qa'ada, which means jalasa. Ibn Qayyim said jalasa, yajlisu ala al-arsh, that he sits explicitly. But see, like al-Qushayriyy is saying, the hidden reality of the issue is that the problem also is that when they explain this to people, they tell them take it literally. You have to take it literally, but really only Allah knows what it means. So they'll say you've got to believe in the hand of Allah. They'll say you've got to believe in the foot of Allah. So this new person who's just has come to them, he says, okay, you've got to believe in the hand of Allah, but it's not like other hands, and Allah is not like the creation. You got to believe in a foot of Allah. And a'udhu billah. So they leave him lost. They leave him absolutely lost. Subhanallah. And they can't explain their work, because how can you explain? How can you say he's like the creation, but he's not, or he isn't, but he is? Like Ibn Taymiyyah said, he said when he recited the verse, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ, or part of the verse, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. He said, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ. He's nothing like the creation. He cleared himself. He said, نَزَّهَ. He cleared himself. And then Ibn Taymiyyah said, وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. And he is the one who hears and sees. He said, شَبَّهَ. That he likened himself to the creation. These two matters are opposites. So, like they say in language, an oxymoron, like something that's hot, cold, or something that's big, small. So nazzaha means he freed himself from being like the creation, and shabbaha means he made himself like the creation. So Ibn Taymiyyah said in the first part, laysa kamithlihi shay, Allah cleared himself from being like the creation, and in the second part he likened himself to the creation. So if this is someone's leader, if he's saying ridiculous things like this, then of course they're going to say confusing things. So he said, the hidden reality of this issue is that those who prohibit ta'weel, non-literal interpretations, in reality believe in the actual likening of Allah to the creation. There's this, I don't know what his name is, subhanallah, the one from Australia, do you know his name? Yeah? I don't know who said yeah, but there's a video of him. He says, he's talking to some people. I think they've taken it down now. But I think, he says this. He says, you've got to believe in this foot. He's talking about Allah. In this amazing, magnificent foot. And he's talking with so much passion. You think, a'udhu billah. Yeah. Have you seen that one? Yeah. I think he even says this beautiful, but he says magnificent foot. And he goes on and on. So, what they actually believe in likening Allah to the creation, except that they use deception to misguide people. And they themselves are confused, subhanallah. They say Allah has a hand, not like the hands. A foot, unlike the feet. And an istiwa of himself that is not like what we can imagine among ourselves. To say having an istiwa of himself, in the Arabic is much more clear. To say istawa bi dhatihi, this is kufr. Istawa bi dhatihi, because it literally means that he with himself sat or became high in a place. It's clearer in the Arabic. Hence, let the one who is precise say to them, this speech of yours is in need of clarification. It is self-contradictory to say, we take the issue by the apparent meaning and at the same time cannot conceive its meaning. For example, with regards to what Allah revealed in ayah 42 of Surah Al-Qalam, يَوْمَ يُكْشَفُ عَنْ سَاقٍ. This literally means the day when the saq, shin, will be exposed. This is the most apparent meaning of saq. It has other meanings like shiddatun min al-amr, hardship. So if it's taken literally, on the day of judgment, when the shin will appear, will be exposed, it will be uncovered. If you take by the apparent zahir meaning, then the apparent meaning of saq would be the body part, the organ composed of skin, muscle, bone, ligaments, and marrow. If one took by this apparent meaning, so imagine someone talking to a Wahhabi and saying, well, if you're saying you take by the apparent meaning, and this is what it means, skin and flesh, bones and marrow. If you take by the apparent meaning and you adhere to it and confirm these organs and this flesh and all of this, then this is clear kufr. And if you are unable to take by this apparent meaning, because the Wahhabi might say, no, of course not like this. We don't believe in like this, shin, like this, like ours. So then you say, well, if you are unable to take by this apparent meaning, then how are you taking by the apparent meaning? Which you say that you take by? Did you not abandon just now? Did you not abandon the apparent meaning? And don't you know that the glorified Lord was exalted from that to which the apparent meanings delude? Then how would that be taken by the apparent meaning? It doesn't make sense. So he's absolutely cornered them. And if the one who opposes us, al-Qushayriyy says that these apparent meanings are themselves in origin meaningless in the language, then that is judging part of the Quran as void and claiming that there was no benefit in them being conveyed to us and that they are useless, and this is impossible. So if someone says istawa and yad and a'yun and wajh and saq and all these things, only Allah can know their meaning. Someone might say, well, what was the point of revealing them then? What was the benefit? Why reveal them? Someone might say, well, why do you claim that God revealed them if there's no benefit? If them being there, one might say, is as good as them not being there, what was the point? So he said that this would make parts of the Quran void. If they were meaningless, what would they benefit? It would make them useless, and that's impossible, for there to be something in the Quran that is useless. Such that the scholars of grammar, they said that sometimes there are some letters that outside of the Quran we would say هذه الواو زائدة. It's extra and it doesn't have a function. It doesn't have a function. But in the Quran, they said that when you find such a waw or a letter, you don't say about it za'idah. You don't say about it that it's extra, because that usually necessitates that it doesn't have a function, it doesn't have a benefit, it's just there. To this extent, the scholars, they said, if there is a waw that outside the Quran we would call it za'idah, like an extra waw, if we find such a waw or something like that in the Quran, we say that it does benefit. It gives the meaning of tawqeed, of emphasis. I think that if I remember correctly, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْء, the kaf in لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْء. If this is mentioned outside the Quran, they'd say harf zaid. Or sometimes harf jar, shabihun zaid. I mean, this is going into grammar, but the scholar said the kaf in laysa ka mithlihi shay, laysa ka mithlihi shay, they said yufidu tawkid, it's for emphasis, and like this. So even these letters, the scholar said, they have a benefit. They have a benefit, and they're not useless. What about attributes of Allah mentioned in the Quran? How would mentioning them be useless such that they don't have a meaning? That is absurd. In the language of the Arabs, al-Qushayriyy continues, in the language of the Arabs, one would find as much as one desires of figurative usage, majaz, and depth in meaning in speech. So lots of figurative speech. And the Arabs of the past used to know the different contexts, and they understood the intended meanings. Hence, the one who departs from ta'wil, meaning the one who takes the literal meaning, does that because of this person's limited understanding of the Arabic language. As for the one who encompasses the different dimensions of the Arabic language, knowing the true meanings is easy. And indeed, it was revealed in aayah 7 of Soorah Al-Imran, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. This means no one knows its ta'weel except Allah and those who are deeply rooted in the knowledge. Now this is if one recites it without pausing at the name of Allah, after saying the name of Allah, and instead pauses after the word al-ilm. It is as if it was said, it is as if what was said is, those who are deeply rooted in the knowledge also know it, i.e. the verses in which the attributes of Allah are mentioned. And they say, the scholars, we believe in all of it being from our Lord. In other words, they believe that the muhkamat were revealed by Allah, those verses that only can carry one meaning. And the mutashabihat, they believe also were revealed by Allah. And they believe in all the verses being correct and having a meaning that befits Allah. Thus, with regards to the mutashabihat verses, they either know the meaning precisely or in general. So to say about yadullah, that it means the power of Allah. This is precisely saying that we know the meaning. Other scholars of Ahlul Sunnah said, we don't want to go into it, but it doesn't mean hand, yad, it does not mean hand. Laysa kamithlihi shay. Then they know the meaning in general. This is a type of knowledge. They said, huwa naw'u ilm. It's a type of knowledge. And nafyu naw'u ilm, like the example of the box. Something's in it, you've no idea what it is except that it's not brown. It's a type of knowledge. So these attributes, you know they are attributed to Allah. You know that this attribute is called al-yad. And you know that it's not like our hands. You know it's not a hand, it's not like our hands. It's a type of knowledge. It's a type of knowledge. So this is valid. As opposed to what they were saying, that no, nobody knows what it is, except that it's called al-yad. And you have to take it literally. Wal-'iyadhu billah. Thereafter, belief in something is only conceived after knowledge. As for that which is completely unknown, believing in it is unachievable. And because of this, al-Baghawi, mentioned in his tafsir that Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma said, أَنَا مِنَ الرَّاسِخِينَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. Doesn't it say in the ayah, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهِ? Only Allah knows the meanings of the mutashabih. وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. And those that are deeply rooted. وَالرَّاسِخ. الرَّاسِخ. الرُّسُوخ means to be deeply rooted. وَالرَّاسِخُونَ, and the deeply rooted people, فِي الْعِلْمِ, in the knowledge. So Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma said, I am min al-rasikhin. I am among these rasikhun. I am among these people who are deeply rooted in the knowledge. Meaning I know the meanings of those verses. This is the end of the quote of Al-Hafiz al-Zabidi in reference to what he conveyed from Abu Nasr al-Qushayriyy. May Allah have mercy upon him. There are two methods with regards to the mutashabihat verses. Each of the two is correct. The first is the method of most of the Salaf, i.e. the people of the first 3 centuries. They interpreted the mutashabihat verses by other than their apparent meanings, but in a general way, ta'weel ijmali. This is what we're going to go through next week. So the scholars of Ahl Sunnah interpreted the verses. They made a ta'weel, either ta'weel ijmali, general interpretation, or ta'weel tafsili. They gave tafsil, they were specific. This is by believing. So a ta'weel al-ijmali, general interpretation, so not taking by the apparent meaning. What's the opposite of a ta'weel al-ijmali and a tafsili? The opposite of ta'weel is to take by the literal meaning. So a ta'weel al-ijmali, and we'll finish just after this, this is by believing in them, in the verses, and having the creed that those attributes of Allah which are mentioned within the mutashabihat are not bodily attributes, but rather they have a meaning that befits the majesty of Allah and His greatness, without specification of their exact meaning. Instead, they referred those mutashabihat verses back to the muhkamat verses, such as what Allah Ta'ala revealed in Soorah Ash-Shu, Surah 42, part of aayah 11, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. This means nothing is like Allah in any way. And we'll stop here, inshallah. Is there anything that was unclear? Okay. Barakallahu bikum. Let's stop here. Let's say La ilaha illallah and as-salah ala nabi. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Salam.